News Hub and particularly the host Patrick Gower hyped it up a lot. He said this would be election defining in advance. That's possibly News Hub style. They don't tend to hide their light under a bushel when they've got something to promote. But Patrick did take an interesting stance as the moderator. He moved it along, push them to give an answer, not allow them to deflect, but not spend too much time if it was clear he wasn't going to get an answer to a straightforward question. But he did say he popped up on News Hub at 6 to preview the thing an hour before they went on, and he said, I hope the leaders won't know this, they won't be listening, but I'm going to tell you, viewers, we're going to go straight up the guts from the start, which I thought was a bit of a single thing. What is he going to go in on? And it was, as I thought, does this mean crime? Real hot button issue. And sure enough, it was. But this bit of audio here does highlight perhaps the approach they were going to take. Not so much a question for the both of the leaders, but a kind of confrontational scenario, if you like, they'd have to consider.
You're in your local dairy, and a young shoplifter, let's say they're 13 years old, comes out of the store running away with some stuff that they've stolen. I want to know whether you two have the chance to stop this person. What would you do?
How did they respond to that?
They were both anxious to say they would be men of action and try and stop crime if they could safely, but they were also encouraging people not to try and be what I think they call in the UK a have-a-go hero, where you can end up getting prosecuted, and they don't want to be saying things that the police would then be interviewed by journalists about, saying, no, this is not the sort of vigilante tactics we want, and that doesn't make the public safer, etc. So they were kind of a tough one for them, but it was their opportunity to say, they recognise how serious retail crime is and that they have a plan of action. So yes, they both tried to use that as a springboard to actually amplify their own policies, but that's what expect.
So they weren't prepared to do a Todd Scott from NBR and try and citizens arrest a person.
Well, if I was to be the politician, I'd say that, Mark, what I'm clearly telling you here, that the reality is that that's a very different scenario, because the Todd Scott scenario where the owner of the NBR wrestled what he described as a large gentleman stealing alcohol from a Centre City Auckland supermarket and pinned him to the ground. The scenario that Patrick Gower presented those guys was a 13-year-old.
Yes,
so, yeah.
Yes. Now, some of the pundits criticised the first debate on TVNZ last week as a bit bland. Did you think the amped-up version was as a result of that? Do you think they wanted a different reaction?
I think it might have been, but again, it might be just News Hub's style anyway. They tend to kick a bit harder, maybe let's put it like that. But also they had the minor parties debate News Hub did last week. That was, I think, News Hub Nation show took that over, and their host Rebecca Wright, and that was much more lively, though partly that was because of the personalities involved. Obviously you had very different range of people in the four other parliamentary parties and New Zealand First, who obviously want to be back in Parliament. So that was a very different.
So that was Winston and David Seymour and Debbie Narewa-Paka?
Yes, and Marama Davidson from the Greens. And but as Jane Patterson mentioned there in your chat, News Hub tonight filled one half of the surrounding audience, so alongside the lecterns where the leaders were with undecided voters, and another side with under 25s, and Patrick Gower said on News Hub at 6 in the preview that they're really important. This is about them, And disappointingly, they didn't actually feature. They weren't consulted in that part of the debate or afterwards as to what they thought, which I thought was a shame, though interesting. And actually here, there was an audience, there was a bit of a vibe, there was reaction, and actually here's a little example of that difference of approach.
Our view has been that there's a deteriorating set of books. We also have a situation where Chris has actually been playing quite a game where actually there are fiscal cliffs around things like Farm Act funding or school lunch funding.
Christopher promised that he would release his fiscal plan before people started voting. Christopher, if you can't keep your promises in opposition, why should New Zealanders believe you'll keep your promises in government?
Well, Chris, let's.
Okay, here is it. Let's get down to some cold hard facts.
So That was good. The ads for tonight's debate said that they're going to, as you pointed out at the start, get to the guts of the big issues, namely the cost of living, the climate change, education and crime. So we've talked about crime. Did they live up to the others?
I've just got scribbles all over my notes here, but Cyclone Gabrielle was mentioned with people intimately affected by it in the studio audience that were interviewed by Lloyd Burr, their correspondent, so that was good. They tackled sort of rainbow rights and issues, which didn't really come up much in the TVNZ one. Those sort of personal moral questions that are a bit awkward with Christopher Luxon, the abortion issue, his faith, that was one where it was awkward for Chris Hipkins as well, not wanting to be disrespectful, but Patrick Gower actually as the host and moderator took that on. There was also the bit about racism, and they referred back to that at the end of the discussion. They had a bit much like the TVNZ one with three pundits, although it was a different cast. But one of them was Julian Wilcox, the leading Māori broadcaster and journalist.
Mā here on RNZ.
Indeed. Yeah. So Julian mentioned that he'd been on the campaign trail and had seen candidates of identifiably ethnicities or non-Pākehā, non-white ethnicities, and he said he'd seen it, that in their face they were getting hostility that was clearly based on, their appearance and their difference or whatever. He said that's a fact and that is something that needed to be confronted. It was slightly awkward in the debate where, when asked, is New Zealand a racist country, that was the question Patrick Gower bluntly put to them. Chris Hipkins took the opportunity to be party political about it and said Chris Luxon is, I think, what do you say, trying to reach political accommodation with people who are, and that drew a kind of an intake of breath from people who thought that was, so a real moment of tension in the debate. Anyhow, on climate change, seeing as you mention it, I think it's kind of a shame because on that it wasn't perhaps more discussed, and also in the general news, because on Monday Labour announced a climate manifesto, as it was described, a second emissions reduction plan, a ministerial role to oversee the transition to lower emissions. Quite important stuff, but of course that got overshadowed by election politics, you feel like, on that day, because that was the day Christopher Luxon made his position on New Zealand First clear, in a Facebook video that had been leaked to media, I think, before the night before. So they all had it prepped to talk about on Monday, and that took a bit of the steam out of that sort of party, that electioneering, if you like, away from an issue that really ought to be front and centre of the debate. And for TVNZ, I just want to make a separate point on that. I think they really ought to cover this more in the news, because on Sunday, their politics show Q&A ran a poll asking about what New Zealanders would be prepared to do or not do to meet climate change commitments, and more than 2/3 said they weren't prepared to pay more for petrol and electricity to reduce emissions if they had to, which is an interesting finding worth debating. And do you remember that fuss about the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority buying space on TVNZ news programs to air climate change, and also a full 1 hour special hosted by TVNZ journalists? So if they're going to cover it when they get a check, they ought to cover it perhaps when it comes up in election time, when TVNZ has said that airing that sponsored stuff was, in their words, part of their own commitment to sustainability.
Yeah. TVNZ ran other election debates this week. Of course, there was the youth issue one on Monday and a Māori issues one on Tuesday. Did you take a look at those?
Yep, sure did. Watched all those all the way through. They were only online, though, on the TVNZ Plus on-demand service, and I think there was a bit of a shame, because perhaps the non-youth adjacent audience that might be more likely to be watching on prime time on TV1 could really benefit from seeing it. So that was hosted, the youth one, by Isaac Gunston from One News's digital team, and Anna Harcourt, and she's the editor of the digital content service TVNZ has for younger people called Re. And actually we're going to have her on Mediawatch, all being well, this Sunday, to talk about what you mentioned with Jane there, how media can play a role in attracting more young people to politics and having their issues aired. But here's how Anna introduced the youth debate on Tuesday night.
Kia ora koutou. In the supermarket today, one cabbage was $7. With that and the cost of rent, plus, of course, the impending doom of climate change, it can feel like a pretty shit time to be a young person. But we've got politicians here to tell us what they're going to do about it.
So that's pretty straightforward. What or straight hitting? What issues did they cover apart from those costly cabbages?
Yeah, well, on Monday night, not Tuesday, as I just said, never wrong for long. They covered quite a bit. So what they did was they got Ipsos, the survey company, to work out what they thought to survey younger voters and what were their top issues, and also they said their own surveys they conducted through their own platform News. So cost of living was the main one, no surprises there, but also climate, rainbow rights and housing were the top four. And they pretty good discussions on other things as well, differences on, tax, housing, immigration. Also that dentistry policy came up pretty well. But one part that had, I think, the most impact in the debate, and their sort of filmed inserts, was short interviews with Tamaki. I think they were from Tamaki High School, but a lot of senior kids at the high school who were working, I shouldn't say kids, senior young adults, senior students, working, some of them more than 20 hours a week, often, early in the mornings to make money for their whānau. And that was, really had an impact on, I think, some of the candidates and also the audience who played a role, because there were questions from the audience in this debate too, which was another difference.
Well, I read today, I think some 12-year-olds are out working now as well, leaving school early to work, family commitments, no doubt. The debate was intended to air issues for millennials and Gen Z, or Gen Z, should I say. The parties put forward young candidates for that debate?
Yeah, interesting, because I don't think you need to. I think everybody knows young people, has them in their family, whatever. I don't think it needs to be exclusively that way. But there was, for example, Hana Rafiti Mapai Clark of Te Pāti Māori. She's 21. She performed really well, in my humble opinion. And New Zealand First had then number 12 on the list, Lee Donoghue, who is, I don't know exactly his age, but he presents as a very young person. Labour put up Arena Williams MP, who's, I think, 33. ACT put up Deputy Brooke Van Velden, I guess one of the younger crew. And the Greens had Chloe Swarbrick, who I guess is their kind of standard bearer for youth issues. But the Herald's Audrey Young pointed out that the National Party put up Erica Stanford, who is some way older than the National Party's, in her words, Audrey Young's words, young fogey Simeon Brown, who was 32, who was, I guess, maybe she thought their most obvious candidate for the debate.
Young fogey, I love it.
Yeah, but I mean, it did create this rather awkward kind of gender imbalance on the platform. So there were 5 women and then just suit and tie wearing Lee Donoghue for New Zealand First, and he looked a bit isolated when he introduced himself. He said one of the main things New Zealand First would bring would be to counter woke extremism, and he was saying quite a few things that were the others were just not sympathetic to, and one bloke and other women pretty much taking a contract. It did look a little bit awkward, and during the rainbow rights section it actually got pretty heated, because Lee Donoghue was trying to defend his leader Winston Peters' policy statements about things like school toilets and bathrooms and transgender people in sports. But aside from that, there was a kind of fun moment when Lee Donoghue gave an unexpected answer in this bit, which was about climate policy.
Are you afraid of dying in an extreme weather event caused by climate change?
No, I'm not afraid.
You've been hit, I have to ask, what?
Yeah, I was in Rome with a friend of mine. We went to an Iron Maiden concert and we were walking over this bridge and I was like, wow, look at that lightning, that's pretty cool. Bam! And
wow. Not climate change related, but that is a very interesting story. Thank you.
So, as some other politics nerds have noted, that Lee Donoghue can now be added to the roll call of politicians who, fairly mentioned in passing that they've been hit by lightning. I think in the case of Maureen Pugh MP, more than once, possibly 3 times, I think. Yeah. You're not coming across this in your series of election interviews?
Not so far. Not so far. Although, speaking of the young vote, I did interview Shane Jones today, and you know what? He's got a new career in TikTok. He's been doing these little TikTok videos.
I've seen them.
And and some of them have had 460,000 views, for goodness sake.
Yeah, he's getting youth adjacent.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, it came up in the News Hub debate today that Chris Luxon said he was on TikTok, but the question was actually about security and information security, and there weren't many laughs to be had about that, actually.
No, indeed not. So how did the TVNZ Māori Issues debate go?
Yes, this was on Tuesday, the Youth Issues one on the Monday, so 24 hours later. This was hosted by TVNZ's political editor, Mark Leishman. Here's how she kicked it off.
Welcome to TVNZ's Kaupapa Māori debate. Umu Poka Poka Tōranga Pū is akin to a political hangi pit. On the menu, pitches and policy aplenty, promises and posturing, of which our live audience and you at home will be the judge. To the candidates, whether you came in the spirit of Tu, the god of war, or the spirit of Rongo, the god of peace, let our kōrero be respectful.
Well, Shane Jones said to me this morning it was a zoo.
I don't think so. I mean, it was. I think there was some from column 2 and some from column Rongo. Let's put it that way. Yes. A bit of peace and war. But look, they had not only Shane Jones, they had Willie Jackson, John Tamahere for Te Pāti Māori. All who can be combative at times and not give any quarter given. Marama Davidson for the Greens as well, Karan Chua for ACT. So there was a lot there a lot of presence on the stage and a lot to argue about. It did get a bit out of hand at times when it divided into two. So, for example, when the issue of wealth taxes came up, it did get awkward because there were two groups rather than a range of views from the parties. Karan Chua of ACT got quite offended when others accused the leader, David Seymour, of divisive rhetoric, and she's, look, this is very rude. He's not here to defend himself, but that was her job. She was representing the party. But they also on that. Just like the youth debate, they used Ipsos to survey Māori voters' concerns and determine the priorities for the debate. So it was well set up. It wasn't random. And when they did this thing that I'm a bit mixed about, when they have the quick fire questions to try and break it up and move on, which can be a bit like, they were all like Māori specific issues, like should women have the right to speak on marae? Did Māori cede sovereignty in the treaty? What's your view? And they gave a rapid answer, and that was a different kind of viewing experience.
Any awkward or revealing moments?
Yep, a couple, so I picked them out for you. So one for the National Party's Tama Potaka. Early on, he was asked, about the pretty modest benefit that some Māori whānau would earn from National's tax cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I put the Māori median wage through National's own tax calculator. It saves an individual without children, it saves them $8.31 a fortnight, $4.15 a week. That sounds like carrots and beans.
Oh, it's more than the carrots and beans, broccoli and Brussels sprouts.
What can you buy for $4.15?
What can I buy for $4.15? A couple of protein bars. A lot of rice.
And that's going to feed the whānau, is it?
No, it's not going to feed the whānau.
Yes, an awkward moment for him, but good prep there from Mikey, putting the Māori average income into the calculation there. I don't think he was prepared for that. But there was also an awkward moment for some when Mikey asked all the candidates, which one of you are landlords, and rent out houses, and would they be lowering their rents?
What about you, Willie? Will you lower your rent?
They already pay bugger all. Okay, so...
I
can tell you what they pay. I have a whare in Rotorua, they pay $50 a week. I got a whare up here, and they pay $100 a week. So I would, and I pay...
$50, $100?
Took all the cocoa.
Let us know when that comes up on Trade Me, Willie. I think the whānau want to know.
I got proof of it. You can talk to the tenants after this.
No hot water.
It's
in Rotorua, they don't need it.
Yes, if you didn't catch that, we were saying one of his rental houses was in Rotorua, and Tama Potaka from National, his rival, shouting at, probably no hot water then, that's why it's so cheap. It's Rotorua, you don't need it. But I realise I've played a couple of sort of rowdy bits there, but there was lots of, serious and earnest debate of big issues. It was all pretty well handled by Mikey Sherman and absolute broadcast standard, so that really could have been on TV1 like the youth debate for more people to see it, I think.
Yeah, I would have thought that would be, quite appealing, actually. But anyway, any other election coverage of note this week?
Yeah, quite a bit more. So I'm sorry we were filling the whole slot with this, but almost. But Whakaata Māori Television has been doing debates every Tuesday and Thursday for candidates in the Māori electorates. On Tuesday it was Te Tai Tonga. Tina Whitcliffe hosts these, and that actually clashed with TVNZ's Māori debate, which was a bit of a shame. But of course, these days, all available on demand. And last Thursday they had the Ikaroa Rāwhiti electorate debate. Now that covers the whole eastern North Island all the way down to Hutt Valley and Wellington, and Mickey Forbes for her series Mata, which is a sort of TVNZ RNZ co-production or hosted on both, funded by Te Mangai Pāho. She toured the region, and she said in that a third according to their voter surveys, a third of voters there were still undecided, which is quite interesting. And she also made the point that, of course, this is a region where a lot of people are still suffering the after effects of Cyclone Gabrielle, which hasn't come up as much as I thought it would do in general coverage of the election campaign. But one of the people she met in this bit of audio here was Teresa Thornton, and she spoke to Mihi in Raupanga, which is a small town a bit south of Wairoa.
It was a beautiful, pristine creek, and now it's just a big mess. It's just full of debris, metres high, full of slash and debris.
What does this community need from government to ensure that you have these resources forever?
Well, we need to get back to basics. They need to come in here and clean their mess up, because we didn't create the mess in our waterways. It was never created. Our tupuna never farmed like that.
Yeah. So
fascinating. Yeah. So
yeah, I thought, I just realised listening to that clip that just sounds like someone airing a grievance. What was interesting was about that community, and Mihi put it in her report, they built their own water system to up on the hill, and turned the creek that she mentioned there was actually feeding this water system, a whole system of tanks. So they'd acted, off their own bat for the resilience of their community. But now the creek was suffering, as she was saying there, from all the stuff coming down it. So it's a bit sad. So that clip actually gives a slightly wrong impression, but it was a really good look at what was going on in that community.
A revealing look at a large and diverse region,
yeah.
I would guess you'd say.
Yeah, and actually reminded me of something that I wanted to mention to you last time we spoke, and I clean forgot. But another person touring that area, another journalist, was Leonard Powell from RNZ's First Up program. He did a pre-election roadie from Whakatane down around the East Cape, filmed some and filed some lovely stuff. One report from Tokomaru Bay is the first one of those that I heard. But the Gisborne Herald has actually been running Leonard's written versions. It's a series in the paper, which I thought was great. But I saw it, when I went looking for it, I found only one of the readers had written to the paper to complain under the headline, "Journalism? Really?"
What was the issue there?
Well, this guy had written and say, Mr. Powell stopped at exactly how many towns? 1, Tokomaru Bay. How many people did he interview? 3. And one of them was obviously prearranged. Journalism? Not in my 40 years in the news business. But this guy, who I'll call Albert, that's not his name, didn't seem to realise it was part of a series. And there were plenty of people in it that Leonard spoke to. So I'm not quite sure what he was complaining about there.
And any more election debates? Any coverage?
Yes, just briefly, the RNZ and the Pacific Media Network teamed up for a Pacific issues debate this week. And that made the point also that this is the fastest growing section of the voting public, but possibly not one focused on a lot when the campaign heats up. And also, of course, your own series, Mark, rumbles on. It's a 10-part series, isn't it, on
it is.
Sky Open and Country TV, the channel formerly known as Prime, Sky Open. So you had Damien O'Connor on Tuesday, which I saw part of, and Mark Cameron of ACT on Wednesday. Now, I know Mark Cameron has ended up in the news because, he became a story because some of these fairly fringe views of his on social media from before he became an MP, or fairly shortly before.
Pretty nasty comments, you have to say.
Yes, and these he says he now has kind of rejected. I know you brought it up because it could hardly be avoided, although you really want to talk about rural issues, which is the point of the interviews. But when you did bring it up, I was interested in his answer, and this is how he explained it to you.
We just recently bought this farm. I'd been diagnosed with kidney disease only a few years earlier. They said, you're going to be lined up for a transplantation. Same disease John Lomu had. So this is all new to me. And then we've got this thing called the Zero Carbon Act. All my dreams were being marginalised the way I saw it. And I didn't know where my future lay. The fact that I was more active in my language is probably in part all the things that were going wrong. And then we got M. Bovis.
Yeah, so I thought there was an interesting level of self-analysis, and he did also use the word visceral. I used fairly visceral language. Of course, not just the language he used, the concepts. It's the things about vaccines, control, I think the United Nations, and some sort of fairly conspiracy-adjacent stuff. So why, when things are going wrong, you quite latch onto that stuff? He didn't really go there. However, he explained that this was a response to pressure, and that probably is what happens to other people. And I think in the course of an interview, because these last the better part of an hour, don't they?
They do, yes.
Yeah, and then he was pretty thoughtful about not willing to give ground on some things to do with methane emissions and so on, which people who want to push harder for agricultural sector to join the battle to bring emissions down. Wouldn't be satisfied by what he had to say, but he was thoughtful, and perhaps interesting for people to watch that who may only know of him from the news-based commentaries about mining his social media from the time shortly before he entered Parliament.
Yeah, it's been interesting actually, and the way the different politicians, do the interviews. The older politicians, the Damien O'Connors, have had David Parker and James Shaw give good fulsome answers. I found with David Seymour, he is very quick and very much on message, and you get through the questions too quickly. And I was about 3/4 of the way through thinking, I'm going to run out of questions.
No, well, you have listeners' questions as well.
That's right, we have viewers' questions
written in, which come up on the screen. So
the
one thing I do find a bit funny, it's called The Road to the Beehive, and I'm not trying to be mean here, but I like the way the set is, like a couple of armchairs with the backdrop of a road leading to the beehive. It does look, when I first glanced at it, I think, you do worry about some Fonterra tanker or something.
Coming through
in the distance, you have to quickly separate the chairs till the truck goes by, but of course it's all just the backdrop.
It is, of course. It's the fireside chat, Colin, fireside chat.
Indeed.
So now we've got a couple of minutes left, 3 minutes. What would you like to go on, more political polls? Or?
Yeah, I'll just briefly mention the polls because obviously we're on a big political kick tonight. So another poll this evening, Wednesday, TVNZ's latest one, they're weekly now. So they say that this showed, Winston Peters can expect a call. They put it, this is the line they're running. But I was a little surprised with the way News Hub presented it. So this is how political editor Jenna Lynch hyped it up in advance on social media.
Tonight, we will bring you a blockbuster, the latest News Hub Red Research poll. This is a game changer. The face of this election is changing in more ways than one. Tune in for the dramatic results.
Results not dramatic enough?
Yeah, it was similar to the results of other polls. Of course, this one, New Zealand First, got over the 5.2%, but other polls have had them about there as well. So I think the point really for me is that they're saying this will change the game. Maybe it will, but that's a margin of error poll, and it may not be the same in 3 weeks' time. And I don't think News Hub did enough to justify introducing the poll that night like this.
Both Labour and National have taken a dive while, wait for it, Winston Peters has crossed the threshold. He is coming back to Parliament and his Kingmaker crown is sitting atop his head once more. Our political editor Jenna Lynch is here now with the numbers. So Jenna, when he's back.
Yes, the Kingmaker is back.
Yeah, so I don't think that's particularly good reporting. He's not back until we vote in the election, and we will let them know, as I think I said to you last time. And within the margin of error result in a survey of 1,000 people 3 weeks out, I don't think is sufficient to conclude that.
And in fact, I think Peters is very quick to say that nothing's decided, no one's voted yet. I think he's hanging out for the early votes coming in from October the 2nd. People start their voting. He's trying to get in first, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, can I mention something super briefly, just in the few seconds we have? TVNZ got in touch with me in the weekend on Mediawatch. We reported on them announcing they were going to appoint a full-time reporter in Dunedin, which they haven't had for months, which is great. And I used the word black spot when I referred to their office in Dunedin being without a journalist. They wrote in to say they do in fact still have a full-time camera operator and a sports reporter, Michelle Prendeville. And I'd asked if their cutbacks that we reported on last week meant they'd have to suspend that Dunedin reporter, but they say no, they'll be appointing it, but the Bureau is still a going concern with 3 people in it, but it really does need a permanent news reporter, so they're getting one.